Hey Creative Fam, and welcome back to another Dollar Tree DIY home decor project. So for this one, I made a gorgeous Glam wall light or chandelier light using the power plug-in lights. And I absolutely loved this design and how it turned out. I'm just going to jump right into the video and show you guys how I made it. To start this project, I used 5 of the 4x6 frames. And these are the frames that has the easel in the back of it with like a metal bracket for hanging. And there's also a small inside frame inside these. The inside frame is like really thin and flimsy. It's just like a thin piece of plastic, which ends up being perfect later on. So I keep out 2 of the inside plastic frames and 1 of the hanging brackets, and I set those to the side. Next, I use a pair of pliers to remove the little metal tabs on the back of these, and then I painted the backs of the frames so that they would match a little bit better. Now, my paint job didn't turn out perfect, but that's okay. I just didn't want there to be such a difference, like silver on one side and black on the other. So I was just trying to blend them all together. Next, I used acrylic gems from Dollar Tree, and I started gluing these around the frame. Now, I want these gems to be glued standing straight up, so I do have to hold these for a few seconds each before I can go on to the next gem. So all I'm doing here is I'm just swiping each gem with epoxy glue, and I'm adding a little tiny dab of hot glue to secure these where I want them. And I work my way around all 3 sides of the frame, covering both the 4-inch sides and one of the 6-inch sides, leaving one of the 6-inch sides plain. So I repeat this for 3 more picture frames, giving me a total of 4 fully prepped frames with gems and 1 plain Jane frame, just bare. So after these had time to dry, I tested out the bond of the gems just to make sure each gem is secured. So I'm grabbing and pulling each of them with a good bit of pressure, just so if I didn't get one of them glued on really good, I can fix that now instead of later. So next, I used a 6-inch by 8-inch stretched wooden canvas. And by the way, I did check online and they are out of stock on their website, but they are showing they do have some 4x6-inch canvases in stock. So I'm thinking maybe you could double up on those if you wanted to make this and didn't have this canvas. So all I did here was just cut the fabric with a pair of scissors, and I pulled until I completely removed the fabric from the frame. And then of course, I sanded it and I painted it with acrylic paint just to give it more of a finished look. While that's drying, I go back to my 2 inside plastic frames that we set to the side a moment ago, and I glue those 2 frames sandwiched together with epoxy and hot glue, and I spray painted one side of these plastic frames silver. Now, once that was dry, I made a cut on one of the 4-inch sides so I can thread my gems. Now, the gems that I'm using are Christmas ornaments, and these are from Hobby Lobby. And if you don't know, they sell these year-round, by the way. So I start by threading the jump rings through the cut where I made until the plastic frame was pretty full with gems. Now, if you don't have any hanging gems on hand, or you don't really want to buy any, then you can just glue acrylic gems from Dollar Tree to like some clear fishing line and make your own strands of gems. And this works great. I've done this a million times. So once I had all my gems where I wanted them, then I secure them into place by dabbing a little bit of hot glue on the jump rings, which will keep these from like sliding around and going all over the place. Next, I used a couple of pieces of tape to connect the ends back together where I made my cut, and then I glued, my last gems on that side after I had my ends connected together. Next, I used this rectangle mirror from Dollar Tree. This is pretty new, but I know several of you in the live stream last week said that you have seen these. So all I did was just remove the mirror from the original frame, and I set that to the side. So now I have all my pieces prepped and I'm ready to put everything together. The first thing that I do is I center my bare 4x6 picture frame facing up on the bottom wood frame. Now, I couldn't find my tape measure, so I used diamond wrap to find the center, and then I made my marks. I sand both surfaces and I cleaned the dust off before I added some cement glue that I found at Walmart, and it dries clear, by the way. And I also used a dab of hot glue securing the two frames together. Then I drill 3 pilot holes going across the frame. And of course, I added my screws inside each of the pilot holes. And I take my time drilling this, going really slow with it, just to make sure that I don't crack any of the frames, especially because of the picture frame. It's not made of wood, and I just wanted to make sure that I didn't crack it or anything. And as I got my screw head closer to the frame, it did crack a little bit, but not enough to hurt anything. You can just use a strong adhesive for this part if you want. It's according to how much weight you have on your inside frame. And what I mean is your hanging gems. So if you're not going to use any hanging gems, or you have very few, or maybe they're lightweight, then of course you can just glue this part on. I also use my drill bit to kind of notch out a place in the side of the frame for my plug wire so the light will lay flush on the wall. And I kept my bit on the edge of the wood. And then with a metal file, I kind of just sand out enough space for my cord. Now you can use a hot knife or maybe a small hand saw and make a couple of cuts and then sand out a groove if that's easier for you. So once that's finished, I used one of the hanging brackets that came with the 4x6 frames because I already had my drill out. So I go ahead and I measure and drill the bracket into place, and then I go ahead and remove it. It's much easier to go ahead and do this now before you get everything put together. So all you have to do when you're finished is just drill it back into place, and there's no worries about applying too much pressure on the face of the gems once this is completed. Next, I trace and I cut out a piece of foam to glue on the back of this mirror. And I just felt like it needed a little something behind this glass just to give it a little bit of support. After I hot glued the foam piece to the mirror, then I'm ready to glue the mirror to the wooden frame. And I use a generous amount of epoxy on the top and the sides of the mirror, and I place my mirror flush with the top of the wooden frame along the sides, making sure to create a gap at the bottom, which is going to be wide enough to run my lights through this slot here that we're creating. After a few minutes, then I'll flip over the mirror and I fill the gaps between the foam and the wood, completely sealing the mirrored edges with hot glue. Now, I used a lot of hot glue, making sure that this is permanent and will not go anywhere. While the glue was still very, very hot, I also applied some weight on the top of the mirrors, and I left this alone to sit and dry for a couple of hours. Once that's dry, I'm ready for the fun part. I'm ready to see how this design comes together. So I grab my 4 prepped 4x6 frames, and I have those sitting beside me ready to go. First, I go around the bottom frame with the exact same gems like we did in the very, very beginning, gluing them on just like before on the 3 sides with epoxy and hot glue. After the bottom row is completely glued on, then I start building up with each frame of gems. Now, these frames are very lightweight, so I just use a thick coat of epoxy glue on the 6-inch side and glue the frame to the mirror. Then I ran another bead of hot glue along the frame and mirror, connecting the two together. And I start stacking and gluing each frame on top of one another, working my way up. I started doing these a little bit different. After my first one that I glued on, I would run the thick bead of epoxy glue along the 6-inch side to be glued to the mirror. Also, I would add epoxy glue on some of the gems that's on the bottom so that the frames and the gems will all be connected and all be kind of together like one unit. I also add a bead of hot glue on the front and the back of each frame, sealing this to the mirror. After all the frames are glued on, then I flipped the base on its back so that the bottom picture frame is facing me. And then I grab my inside frame with the hanging gems so it's ready to go. I use epoxy glue and hot glue, getting both of the glues pretty thick along this frame, especially the hot glue. And then I take my inside frame with the hanging gems and I place it back inside the factory crease where it originally went, and it fits perfect. Even though it's doubled in thickness and it has metal jump rings, it actually fits perfect. So then I flip my gems out of the way so that I could press firm on the inside plastic frame. And I especially made sure to get a ton of glue in all four corners. I just kind of filled those up with hot glue. And then I waited for that to dry, which took a little while. Quite a few minutes, actually. So now I turn my light fixture where the back side is facing me, and then I thread my lights through the slot. Now, if you want brighter lights, you can use like a strand of 50. What I'm using is just 20, a strand of 20 bulbs. Once my lights are all threaded through the bottom, then I glue and secure the bulbs where I want them. And then I work my way up and around the inside of the frame until I reach the top. I added yet another row of acrylic gems on the bottom part of the bottom frame so that this design starts and ends with the same look, or, the same gems. Now for the last thing, I cut off 2 rows of adhesive gems to go around the outside, making a border around the mirror. And then I simply screw the bracket back into place and I hang this beautiful light on the wall and plug it in so I can enjoy this new creation, because this project is finished.